Okay, so we're talking about jump-starting your native mobile app development with NativeScript and Angular. The year is 2019.
Okay.
Okay, 2019. Angular version 20 is the hottest thing out there right now.
Mm-hmm.
Angular bots fetch us coffee in the morning. Angular self-driving cars take us to the office. And Angular 3D is rendering the hottest virtual reality games on the market. And everyone is happy with the latest and greatest healthcare plan, hopefully. All right, now close your eyes for a second and imagine what you're doing in 2019. Are you using Angular to create the best user experiences on the web or other devices? Maybe you are. Now let's come back to the present for a second. What is Angular good for in 2017, right now? What can you do with Angular right now? So this may surprise some of you may not. You can create web apps, you can create desktop apps, and you can create mobile apps. Web apps, everybody knows you're using the browser for that. Desktop apps are written with Electron. Electron allows you to write desktop apps with using JavaScript, but you can also use Angular as the framework of choice. And you can create mobile apps using either Ionic or NativeScript right now. Angular is what's known as a platform agnostic framework. What does that mean? That means all those things I mentioned on the previous slide. It allows you to write your code and build your applications on multiple different frameworks without being tied to the DOM, for example, as you would with a previous version of Angular. So what is NativeScript then? How is this related? I first thought it was a language when I first heard about it. Does it sound like a language to anybody? Yeah, that's what I first thought. So I ripped this off from their website, and I'll read this to you so you don't have to. NativeScript is an open source framework for building truly native mobile apps with JavaScript. You can use your web skills like TypeScript, Angular, CSS, or JavaScript, and you get native UI performance on iOS and Android. Okay, that and shouldn't be there. I'll tell them about it. So why do we need another cross-platform framework for doing this kind of development? Right, why do we need this? We already have Ionic, right? Okay, so these are the two ones we have right now, Ionic and NativeScript. Ionic 2 is for building hybrid apps. What does that mean? You're building an app, it's hosted in a native shell, is deployed as a native application to the device, but it's hosting a web view, and you run your web application inside of that. This gives you pretty good flexibility, but it's often misused in the wrong hands. So what NativeScript addresses, it was specifically created out of the desire to create a framework where you can use JavaScript to build mobile apps, but without the performance and usability limitations that are inherent in Cordova applications. All right, that's a Cordova application. So you still use your Angular code, but instead of running in a web view, you actually get native performance, native animations, and native UI. All right, so when you run a fully native UI, you don't get janky scrolling or animation problems or other performance bottlenecks that you see when you run in a web view. So you're actually using iOS and Android native UI because you're building for both platforms, and I'll show you that in the demo later on. So you build interfaces using native UI components. Okay, you're not using a web view, and there is no DOM. That's NativeScript. The result is an iOS an Android app that feel native because they truly are. So if you want to grab an example of what that feels like, you can go to one of the app stores and download or search for NativeScript example, and you'll see an example application. So another benefit, okay, with NativeScript you get to reuse all the skills and all the tools that you know and love as a web developer. Ease of doing native things. Native. What does that mean, native? So out of the box, the NativeScript team has created all these widgets for you that basically convert to native components on the devices. But native also means that you have your native APIs. So iOS APIs and Android APIs. You can write your JavaScript code against those APIs directly. So for example, if you want to create a label in iOS, you just write new UI label, if anybody's familiar with iOS development. And you do that in your JavaScript code, which is very easy and convenient. Very cool. It has a vibrant and growing community worldwide. And also, the company that created NativeScript offers enterprise support for those that need it. Okay, who's awake? Pop quiz. How many of you are Angular developers?
I've done development in
Cool.
Angular, but I'm not an Angular.
So everybody, right? Okay. And how many of you are native mobile developers? Okay, what are you developing?
Excuse me. Well, okay. Historically, Objective-C for iOS.
iOS. You do Android?
Well, now I do it the hybrid way.
You're just getting to my punchline. Lead me to my punchline.
But not with
NativeScript?
Actually, I'll be the unpopular person in the room. I think JavaScript is evil and useless and dangerous and in the wrong hands if it's in anybody's hands.
Agreed. JavaScript is bad in the wrong hands.
That's everybody's hands. There are no right hands for JavaScript. Having built cross-platform web apps in web views for iOS and Android, and seeing all the different ways that can go horribly wrong. So now I'm learning all the ways to do horribly wrong using Xamarin and Visual Studio. Cool. Doing it all in C#.
That's one way to do it. So yeah, I mean, those people that are familiar with native development, but they do one platform or another, either one or the other, now they have the ability to do both platforms and still get good results and still get native results. So that was the point of that slide. But Alex, are you telling me that you can just take your web code and plop it down into your native application and everything will just work the same way? What's the difference here? Well, this is the stuff I'm not going to make you read. This is off their fact site. Basically, NativeScript does not use HTML as DOM, something I've already mentioned before. I'm going to get into the differences specifically right now. So these are the 5 major points that are different, and I will go through them, and I will also show them to you in the demo later on. So who is familiar with the Angular 2 way besides, well, you are, right? But anybody else? Okay, so there's some code that I'm going to show you later on, and I'll show you the differences. So here we have what we're doing in the browser, and here we have what we're doing in NativeScript. Okay, there's some lines that we're going to initialize the application, and all we're doing is swapping one for the other. Basically, there's browser, we're calling browser function, and here we're calling a NativeScript function. Really, there's 3 differences that are like that, where you're just swapping out stuff. So platform is another one of those. Here we're importing the browser module, and here we're importing the NativeScript module. This is the biggest difference, I'd say, markup. So we have HTML elements in the DOM in the browser. That's what it looks like. Everybody's familiar with that. NativeScript, markup elements, there is no DOM. I call it NSML. Okay, there's no such thing, but that's what I call it because it's easier to say than all the other stuff. And that's what that looks like. So you have a layout and you have a label inside. So if anybody's familiar with XAML,
I was about to ask how
Yeah.
that compares to, how similar it is to XAML.
it is XAML-ish.
Okay.
Okay? Forms is another one of those things where we just swap. And finally, routing. Routing is probably the most different one. In the browser, we have the Angular router. And in NativeScript, we have a special router that includes all the functions that the Angular router, in NativeScript, there is a special router that includes all the functions that the Angular router has. But because it's a native application, it offers you more functionality. So let me show you some of the stuff that I've been talking about. In action. So I've already asked who's familiar with Angular 2. Not too many people in this room are, but this is the Angular 2 documentation site. And it's not called Angular 2 anymore, it's called Angular. And there's a little tutorial here that I highly recommend people go through because it's really easy. It makes starting out with Angular really simple. I know you do too, so you should have raised your hand.
I do like a very small.
So this is what the app looks like. It's really, really simple. Let me restart that. We have a title here. We have two links that take you between the dashboard page and the heroes page. Heroes page is just a list of heroes. When you click on one of them, you get the details down here. You can also go to the details page and edit it with two-way data binding. And there you go. You have been edited, and it basically updates throughout. So a very simple app. We're not going to go through the whole tutorial, but what my goal here is today is to show you how we can convert this web into NativeScript, and you'll see what the differences are, and I'll point those out to you. I already have NativeScript installed. So to create a project, I just do tns create. TNS is the command for creating a new project. And TOH is the name, Tour of Heroes. I just give it a short name like that. And I'm going to pass it the ng flag, which means I want to create an Angular application. Now, with NativeScript, you have the option of creating an Angular application, or you can create a pure JavaScript application, or you can use TypeScript if you want. But you don't have to use Angular. Since this is related to Angular, I'm going to use it. So now I'm going to go into that folder that it just created, and I'm going to open up my editor, which is Visual Studio Code. So here's the folder structure it creates. Pretty simple. Let's start with some of the differences that I pointed out at the start. Here's main.ts. This is where everything gets bootstrapped. It's the beginning of the application, to put it simply. So one of the imports we're doing is this function called platform browser dynamic. And in NativeScript, we also have a main.ts. And here we're importing platform NativeScript dynamic. So instead of browser, NativeScript. Okay, and then in the app.module, we have a browser module here. And of course, in NativeScript, we don't have browser. So instead, we're importing the NativeScript module, which does the same thing. All right, moving on. So what do we need to do here? Well, the introduction is what I've already done. I've introduced you to the app. Let's go to the hero editor.
Quick question. How did you get the TNS that you were able to create?
Yeah, so To install NativeScript, it's as simple as going into npm, and I need to do sudo on this because it's a Mac, but if you're on Windows, you're just going to do npm install NativeScript global. That's all. Very simple. Let me kick off this app so you can see what it looks like. So I just did a tns run iOS command. Since I'm on a Mac, I'm going to use the iOS emulator to show you what it looks like.
So even Windows can run this.
Windows, Linux, Mac, you can run the same exact commands and the same exact code. The only difference is you cannot do the iOS stuff, the iOS builds on a Mac, on a Windows or a Linux machine. It has to be a Mac machine. So since we're on a Mac, I might as well use that. And by the way, that run command is going to automatically watch all my file changes. So if I make any changes, it's going to go ahead and build a TypeScript, deploy it to the emulator, and show you that stuff. So here's a list of people. These are football players and their role when you tap on them. That's just a template. When you first create an app, that's the template that we use. Cool. So what's next? We want to be able to show this title, Tour of Heroes, at the top instead of this My App. So let's go ahead and grab that. And in HTML, we have an H1 where we data bind the title. There's no H1 in NativeScript. So how do we do that? Let's go to the component, add the title, and instead of a template URL, I'm going to do inline template here. So no H1, but we do have a label. Were you going to guess that? And a label has a text property on it, which we can data bind to the title. Let's take a look at what that looks like. And there we go. This is a native view, and that's a native title. So if or native label, I should say. So it's bound to this title in the class, and that's what it's showing there. So NativeScript template, one of the community members actually created this bootstrap-like CSS theme that we can apply. So we have a CSS, we have the ability to just use CSS to style our application components. So by default, this template automatically imports this theme, okay, and I can just go ahead and use that. So I can apply a class to this label of H1 to kind of make it look like it's a larger label, right? And there it is, it's a larger label now. All right, the next step is to have our hero object. So this is the model, the main model that we're going to be using. And I'm going to go ahead and create that class. And I'm going to export class hero, which just has an ID and a name on it. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a hero here of type hero. Everybody's familiar with TypeScript? Basically, it's just a JavaScript object, right? So ID, I'm just going to copy it here. Since we're doing the tutorial, I might as well just use that and copy it. So we have our hero we've created, but it doesn't know what hero is, right? Because it's TypeScript, so everything is typed. So I need to import hero from that file. Okay, so now it's happy. We've imported hero named Windstorm. So now the next step is to show the name of that hero right here. Let's go ahead and do that. So it's another label, but I'm not going to type it all out. One of the other community members created these snippets, which are really fun, make me type really fast. I'm going to bind the text of this label to hero.name. Okay, so some of you might have expected to see both of those labels in there, but since this is a native app and not a web browser, you need to actually specify a root element to be able to see both of these labels. Right now, the second label is on top of the first label. So let's create a root element, and it needs a layout, basically, as a root element. So I'm going to use a stack layout, which is a very easy, foolproof type of layout. And a stack layout basically is like the HTML equivalent of a UL, unordered list, where it just stacks elements on top of each other. So there we go. We have Tour of Heroes, the title, and then we have Windstorm as the name of the hero. Cool. Next. Now we need to edit our hero. So when you edit stuff, you need an input, right? That's what you do in HTML. You use an input. Well, not the same in NativeScript. What do we do in NativeScript? We have a text field. Hint is like a placeholder, and we're going to bind this to the same value, hero.name. Let's see what happens. Okay, so now we have the label, and we have the text field at the bottom, and I can change the text field, but for some reason, it's not updating the other label. Does anybody know why?
Binding?
Yes?
Binding?
What kind of binding?
It's not two-way.
Yeah, exactly. We need a two-way binding here. We only have one-way binding by default, right? So how do we get two-way binding in Angular? We use something called banana in a box. Anybody heard of that? NG model. Football in a box? That actually looks more like a football in a box. Yeah, I agree with you. So we're coming up to one of the other differences between web world and NativeScript world. And that is we need to import the forms module, right? So it's not going to work without a forms module, two-way data binding. So two-way data binding in Angular needs the Angular forms module, but in NativeScript, we need to import another type of module. We need to import the NativeScript forms module. So let me go to our app module, the main top module, and from the NativeScript Angular forms file, we're going to import NativeScript forms module and put it in our imports here. I'm going to save that. Now when I edit this one, we have two-way data binding. Cool, huh?
Sorry, just a minor nitpicky question.
Yeah.
So for the syntax, if you had two labels and two editors, how would you distinguish? Because, NG model is kind of global-ish.
Yeah, so whatever you're binding to is what it's going to be bound to. So you're binding to hero.name.
Oh, okay, sorry.
That's the model, right?
Wrong direction. Yes. Okay.
So if you edit the model, it's going to go up the model and it's going to come down on the other side. All right, we're done with the editor. Let's go to master and detail. Here we're going to have a list of heroes. It's going to be an array of heroes. They have an array of heroes here, but I'm going to have a bigger array of heroes, and I'll tell you why. I want to be able to scroll a list. So I'm going to call this file mock heroes. And it's a bigger list than they provide, so we can actually see how scrolling works. So I'm exporting this constant, which has all these heroes hard-coded. I'm exporting it, and I'm going to go ahead and import it in our app component. All right, so here they are, mock heroes, and we need a list. So in HTML, how do we do a list? UL, LI, right? And in Angular, how do we bind each item? We have an ng4 loop. ng4 is like a structural directive where we say for each one of these or we're going to say, we're going to create a hero variable for each of the heroes. Okay, so in knockout, it's like for each binding. So we don't have a UL or LI in NativeScript. What are we going to use? Does anybody know? Any guesses? We're going to use, we're going to use a stack layout. Stack layout is like the one that stacks all the items on top of each other. So here's our scroll view, which means we're going to be able to scroll. So we're wrapping a stack layout with a scroll view. And here's our stack layout. We have a class of heroes that we're applying to it. And we're doing this ng4. So we're looping through the list of heroes. And for every hero, we're going to display the ID of the hero and the name of the hero. Okay? So how do we know like what this heroes is right here? Well, we need to create a property which is just an array of heroes. And every component in Angular goes through a life cycle. You initialize your component data in a hook called ng-on-init. So we're going to say this.heroes equals that global heroes hard-coded variable that we imported. And we have a list. We're showing the IDs and we're showing the names. Cool. So it's pretty ugly right now. Let's go ahead and give it some styles. And you don't want to watch me type that in because it's very embarrassing. So I'm going to paste it in. By the way, if you're going to put styles, it's better to put them in a separate file if they're going to get this long. But I'm just going to put them inside this file in line like that. So while our app is going to be a lot prettier, our code is going to be a lot uglier. But nobody sees that, right? So, okay, there's our list of heroes. As you can see, we just applied some basic styling to it, CSS styling, stuff that all the web developers are going to be familiar with. And it looks kind of like the other application, the web application. All right, next step is we're going to add a selection. We're going to be able to select a single hero by clicking on it. So in web, we have a click event because we're using a mouse. But when you're talking about a mobile application, we don't have a click event. What we use is a tap event. Okay? So each view, each different component, UI component in NativeScript has different gesture events. One of them is tap. We're going to need to go ahead and provide that onSelect handler. So let's go ahead and copy that out of here. And we're going to paste it in here. And we're going to rename our local hero property to selected hero instead of hero. Okay, so let's take a look at that. So that's selected hero, and here is selected hero. And let me just move that away from the title so we can see it. Okay, so there is our list, and there we go. When we select each one of these by tapping on it, it changes style, and it updates what we have selected at the top. And again, our data binding is still working just fine right here. Wrong spelling. Okay, so how do we get that different style for a selected element? Well, we are able to use Angular's property binding in this case. Okay, so this is class.selected. So we're going to apply a selected class when the current hero equals the selected hero. And the selected class is obviously a little bit different looking. It's now more green. Okay. So we're done with this part, and let's go to multiple components. All right, so now we need a hero detail component. So the way Angular 2 applications are structured is you have your component, top-level component, and within it you have multiple other child components that live inside. So right now, everything is in our app component, but we want to take this little part right here and we want to extract that out into a separate child component called the hero detail component. All right, so let's get the hero detail component in there. Now, what I've done is, instead of typing all this out, I'm going to go ahead and copy in a few files, including the hero detail component, just so that we have, we save some time on that. So let me show you what that looks like. Here's the hero detail component, and we still have that hero ID and the name, but with slightly different styling. So how do we get the selected hero into our hero detail component? Well, in Angular, we have this input decorator, right? So we're going to indicate to the child component that we want the selected hero to bind to the hero property of the child component, and we need to use this input decorator. And we also have a selector, a new selector. So when we're using custom components, we're going to use a custom selector also. So instead of these two fields in the main app component, I'm going to use that custom selector. And that hero detail component is its own class with a property of hero. So I'm going to use data binding, and I'm going to bind hero to the selected hero. Let's save that and let's take a look. Okay, so now this part up here is a completely different component. It's the child component. And when I select a hero in the list, it sends the hero, the selected hero, into the child component. All the two-way data binding is still working the same way. Cool. All right, so we have an input and we've done all this stuff. We're going really fast here. Let's get to services. So services is probably the only thing that we can reuse throughout without changing any UI code, because most of the services you're going to use are going to be data-driven and just JavaScript code. So let's go to the bottom here, and we have this, this service. I already have it in here. So instead of hard coding our heroes, we want to use a service to provide the heroes. So the service goes out and uses the hard-coded heroes that we've created, but we have the option to go out on the web, go to some API, and grab a list of heroes from there if we want to. Now, a service is marked as injectable. That means we're using Angular's dependency injection to be able to get that into our components, and we do that using a constructor. So I'm going to indicate a constructor, and our hero service, oops, we're going to inject that in. Angular knows how to do this. So now we've injected it, but this component doesn't know what hero service is, so we need to import it. We don't need to hard code this anymore, right? So let's go ahead and replace that. Oops. Oh. So we're going to import hero service from the hero service file. It's actually a module, but we use the word module too often, so I say file. And now our hero service is happy, TypeScript is happy, so now we can just call the hero service to get our data. Hero service get heroes, and this returns a promise, right? So we're going to be able to call then, and this dot heroes we're going to set to the incoming heroes. Okay, so if we did everything right, then nothing should change. There we go. Everything still works the exact same way, but now we have a better app structure because we've taken hard coding away. We're leaving that up to the servers to decide how to provide the heroes to us. Now we came up to routing, which is probably the most complex part, but it's the most interesting part since we have special routing capabilities with native applications. So what are we going to do in routing? Well, this is our action plan. Our app component, which is the top level component we've been working on with the whole time, we're going to turn that into a shell. And that's just going to have a title and two links, the dashboard link and the heroes link. And this heroes list is going to be extracted into a separate heroes component. And the details is also going to be a separate page. It's going to be a component hosted on a separate page as well. Also, the dashboard page is going to be its own component as well. So let's get going with that. We already have a dashboard component here. I'll go through that real quick. What that's doing is basically pulling the heroes from the hero service the same way the hero that we've been doing before, but it's only taking the top four. And it's also styling them a little bit differently, like boxes.
Can I interrupt?
Sure.
How do you plug in any third-party components?
I'll get to that in the question section afterwards, yeah. Okay, so heroes component is what we're going to get to once we pull everything out from our app component. It's basically the exact same thing you've already seen. The only difference is now when you tap on a component, it's going to go to the details page. Okay, so this is the final difference I wanted to indicate to you regarding the difference between the Angular setup and the NativeScript setup. So in app.routing, you'll see an example of NativeScript router module. We're also using the Angular router module, but we're only importing routes from there. But you know, routes are set up exactly the same way as they are in the Angular world. So let me show you what that looks like. Here are the routes, and they're exactly the same. But in the web, we're using this router module, okay? Whereas in NativeScript, we're using the NativeScript router module with special abilities. And also, well, let me convert this shell that I was talking about. So I'm gonna go ahead into our app component that we've been building. I'm gonna delete everything. I'm gonna delete these styles. And I'm going to delete a lot of this. Let's go ahead and grab some of this from here. So actually, I'm just going to copy and paste this whole thing. So we still have the title. We have some new styling for the navigation links. But here's the difference. Now we have a stack layout that holds our two links, which are buttons that are styled. And instead of router link, we're using NS router link, which is the NativeScript version of router link. Okay, so that's the difference. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, we have our tour of heroes. We have our 2 pages. The list is still scrollable. And we have these 4 heroes on the dashboard. When I click on one, though, I don't get anything. Same thing here. I don't get anything. So why is that? Well, the hero details need to be edited. Before, it was a child component with an input, but now we're going to navigate to the hero detail page, so we don't need to have it as a child component. It's just going to be looked up from the hero service. We're going to pass in the hero ID in the route. Okay, so in the web world, you have the route, which is going to include the ID in the URL. But in NativeScript, you still have a route, and you just pull out the ID from the NativeScript router helper. Okay, so you do that. And now when I tap on one of these guys, and here we're going to get to the details, which is a separate page. And we still have our two-way data binding working. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this tutorial, but I wanted to show you a couple of extra cool things that we get with the NativeScript router. So this is where we have our links. Usually native applications have a bar, like some kind of navigation bar at the top. This looks very much like a web app that's just placed in a native shell. How do you get this more native-y feeling? There's that word again, native-y. Well, there's a few components that I was mentioning that come with NativeScript out of the box. One of them is an action bar. An action bar is going to give us basically a bar at the top. I'll show you what that looks like. And each one of these has an action item. So instead of buttons that you see here, and instead of the stack layout, we're going to use action bar and action items. Let me just go ahead and replace that right in place, right here. There we go. And can't forget the closing tags. We also don't need this, this class or the router link active. We don't need that. Let's take that out. Okay, so we're still using the NS router links for our actions to be able to navigate between them, between the pages. And action bars don't have to be hosted inside a root layout. They can just be outside. All right, so let's take a look. Okay, so now at the top we have a native-y kind of feeling with native buttons, navigation bar. That does the exact same thing. Those are native buttons, by the way. Let's give it a title. We can also data bind this to the title that we've had. And we can also position these action items. You can go left on one of them, and we can go right on the other one. Okay, so that feels a little bit more native-y, right? But still we're jumping between pages, and in iOS application, usually when you tap on a navigation link, it kind of nicely slides in, right? Those people that have iPhones know this. How do we do that? Well, we have a router outlet. Those of you that are familiar with Angular know what that is. That's where the views that are the child views get drawn. So the NativeScript router module gives us this special little thing called the page router outlet. And just by making that little change, we're able to get native-like paging. So if I do that, you can see that we get that native animation going on, and we get a free backlink with the name of the previous page. And also we can go to the details. We can edit this. And notice how we can do this kind of finger swiping action. We get that for free with the NativeScript, right? So that's something that the NativeScript router module gives us for free. Cool. Also, you know, iOS comes with different kinds of transitions. Not only that. So let's say you want to do a different kind of transition. I'm going to show you flip. There's other ones that you can use. So I just specify the page transition, and it does a little flip like that. So, yeah, So I just want to conclude this by saying you can go out there, grab this stuff today, and you don't need to wait till 2019 to do it. And now you have the power to create mobile applications, even if you're a web developer, native mobile applications. So I can also show you a demo app that I'm working on for my next course, but I have 2 courses on Pluralsight available right now. You can go check those out. One is with Angular and one is without Angular. And thank you very much. And thanks for EastBanc for hosting.